I first took office in 2017, so was here during the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I was really proud of the impact that had on my constituents who really saw and felt that increase in the average household income. And, it's remarkable how different they feel now, and I think you saw the results of this election partly due to that after the economic policies of this administration compared to the first few years of the Trump administration. So I was very proud of the work we did, and I think the statistic that I'm probably most proud of is that we had the lowest poverty rate than at any other time in our history. So we lifted more people out of poverty than at any other time. This is a different time, though, and I want to get back to some of the comments you made, Dr. Holtz-Eakin, and then maybe Chairman Brady as well. And by the way, Chairman Brady's leadership is why we got the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So I was really proud to serve with you at that time. But we now have $36 trillion in debt as of today, adding $2 trillion per year. One of the ways, my belief is that's one of the greatest threats that we're faced with. It's a predictable crisis. We're going to have a sovereign debt crisis within the next 10, 20 years, probably, if we don't change the trajectory. One of the ways we get out, not the only way, but it's important to have strong economic growth, back to your point, doubling income every 20 years versus every 50 years. And so we have to get the tax code right, and that's why I think, we heard from Mr. Beyer, you believe as well it's important we put growth policies in place, but I also believe that we can't add to the debt with what we're doing at this particular time. I think it's very, very important. So how do you square that? Is it possible to do that? Can we extend the provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that I think are so important to driving a growing economy, and do that without adding to the debt? I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
There's a very, I think, confusing public discussion of this. Simply extending the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act keeps us at the current policy and the current level of deficits and debt growth. So last year, we had $1.8 trillion in deficits, 6.3% of GDP, over $1 trillion of that was interest, so it should be a warning sign. But to simply continue doing that, we'd have $2 trillion deficits, and we'd be on the trajectory that I outlined at the beginning of my testimony. So that it's not that we're going to cut taxes, we're just going to continue with the current level if we just extend. You can do better than that. You could close the gap and improve the growth incentives. And as I mentioned, I think the gold standard would be to have a deficit neutral tax reform that would allow you to do the tax reform that Mr. Brady could design, and which would be permanent, because it would not produce deficits, you wouldn't have to sunset it. Permanent incentives are always better than temporary incentives. That's the gold standard. That's where you want to go. Realistically, to do that, you have to bring in the spending side of the federal budget. There is no way to solve the fiscal problem without addressing the spending. I can do that at great length, but I don't want to use up all your time. But Social Security and Medicare are over 50% of non-interest spending over the next 10 years. Yeah. And they're growing faster, 5.5 for Social Security and 7 for Medicare, than any revenue base is going to grow. They're going to grow at about 4.
Yeah, and I want to give Chairman Reed just, we'll talk a lot more, I'm sure, but I 100% agree, and I think we have to go to the spending side. Spending at about 26% of GDP is at the highest level ever, so we've got to get to it. But Chairman Brady, I'd just like to, I only have another minute, but I'd like to get your reaction to that as well.
I think permanence is so important to the tax code for so many reasons, and I know you're going to have a pretty spirited debate about how much this will be paid for going forward. But all I know is finding pay-fors are hard. If you remember, in 2017, we had $5.5 trillion of tax cuts. We paid for $4 trillion of it up front. So 72% of those tax cuts were paid for when President Trump signed that bill. Since then, we've had significant revenue growth, somewhere between $0.5 trillion and $1 trillion. So we've raised that cover significantly as well. It is terrifically hard to do pay-fors, but it is part of the process of trying to make permanent, the provisions that most lift wages and most give you growth in competition and innovation. Yeah, and it is worth pursuing that permanence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know I'm out of time, but I do want to submit for the record, if I may. My next question was about 199A. I'd be very interested in hearing some of the ideas to simplify it. I think it's really important to our Main Street businesses. And I have a study about the economic activity supported by the Section 199A deduction I'd like to submit for the record. Thank you.